Now, this is quite a discovery. Fragments of a biblical scroll, along with other relics, have been found in desert caves.
Deep beneath the sands of Egypt, in a cave untouched for millennia, a team of archaeologists stumbled upon something that defied explanation. Fragments of an ancient manuscript said to predate the oldest known biblical writings. Alongside relics and broken scrolls, they found a mysterious book, one believed to be over 5,000 years old. Its faded ink whispering a message that scholars claim could rewrite everything we know about human history. What they uncovered inside wasn't just a story of faith or myth, but a chilling warning about mankind itself. According to early translations, the text spoke of divine messengers, forbidden unions, and a coming judgment that would cleanse the earth. Some researchers have even connected the writings to one of the most enigmatic figures in the Bible, Enoch, the man who walked with God and was taken before death. Could these long-lost pages hold his final message to humanity? Or do they reveal a secret that ancient civilizations tried to bury forever? Join us as we uncover the mystery behind these forgotten scrolls, their hidden prophecies, their strange parallels with the Book of Enoch, and the terrifying truth they might reveal about our own future. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more ancient mysteries back to light. Deep in the limestone cliffs of Deir el-Bersha, a team of archaeologists uncovered something that would challenge everything we thought we knew about ancient Egypt. What began as a routine excavation of a Middle Kingdom tomb soon turned into one of the most startling finds of the century. A sealed chamber, untouched for millennia, hidden beneath layers of collapsed stone and desert dust. Inside, among fragments of pottery and funerary offerings, lay several papyrus scrolls and a bound manuscript unlike any ever seen. The manuscript was fragile, written in a form of script so early that it barely resembled classical hieroglyphs. Its ink, though faded, still bore traces of iron and ochre, a sign of remarkable preservation. When the fragments were carefully unrolled in the lab, researchers found not the usual funerary prayers or invocations to the gods, but something else entirely: intricate star diagrams, unfamiliar symbols, and lines of text that combined ancient Egyptian with what appeared to be Proto-Semitic characters. Some symbols resembled constellations, others appeared to depict waves, storms, and celestial alignments. Initial carbon dating placed the material at over 5,000 years old, predating even the earliest known religious writings from the Old Kingdom. The age alone made it extraordinary, but what truly astonished scholars was the content. The text spoke not of death or rebirth, but of visions, warnings, and an era of great upheaval. It described voices from the sky, guardians of the horizon, and a flood that cleanses the world. These were not phrases typical of Egyptian theology. They carried echoes of something older, something shared by the ancient world's earliest civilizations. Egyptologists, linguists, and biblical scholars from institutions around the world began to collaborate on its interpretation. Some proposed that it might represent a transitional text, a kind of spiritual record bridging early Egyptian beliefs with the mythic traditions of Mesopotamia and the Levant. Others went further, suggesting that this book could be the missing link between the Egyptian Book of Two Ways, humanity's earliest known map of the afterlife, and the later writings that would shape Judeo-Christian thought. But the deeper they looked, the stranger it became. Within the faded ink were references to a cycle of fire, to the watchers above, and to the day the earth forgets the stars. Scholars noted that the manuscript seemed to combine astronomy, prophecy, and moral reflection, an ancient meditation on cosmic order and human fate. It was not a prayer, not a guide for the dead, but a kind of revelation, one that blurred the line between myth and memory, The discovery forced a re-examination of early Egyptian civilization itself. It suggested that the people who built the first pyramids and charted the stars were not only seeking immortality, but also grappling with their place in a vast, living cosmos. For the first time, archaeologists began to ask whether the Egyptians, and perhaps their neighbors, had preserved fragments of an even older story, one passed down through flood, fire, and forgotten ages, carefully restored and studied under layers of ultraviolet light. The text revealed more with each passing year. Its symbols hinted at celestial knowledge far beyond what was once thought possible for the time. Knowledge that symbols hinted at celestial knowledge far beyond what was once thought possible for the time. Knowledge that seemed to mirror the heavens with unsettling precision. And as experts worked to decipher the last remaining passages, one question began to echo through the archaeological halls. What truth did the ancient world try to record, and why was it buried in silence for 5,000 years? When the ancient manuscripts from Deir el-Bersha were finally dated and decoded, a remarkable pattern began to emerge. The texts, though physically preserved from Egypt's Middle Kingdom, seemed to draw from ideas much older, as if they were a collection of echoes passed down from a forgotten world. The Middle Kingdom, roughly 4,000 years ago, was an age of reconstruction and reflection in Egypt. Kings and priests looked beyond monuments and tombs to seek understanding of existence itself, life, death, and the mysterious balance between the two. It was a time when the Egyptian mind turned inward, toward questions that still haunt humanity today. Among the fragments, archaeologists discovered verses describing the arrival of those who came from the sky, bearing light and the first laws. These passages stood apart from the hymns to Ra or Osiris. They were not about worship, but about origin. Stories of beings who descended to teach humankind the order of the heavens and the cycles of time. The language was poetic, almost philosophical, suggesting that the scribes who copied these words were preserving traditions even older than Egypt's own civilization. Linguists studying the script noticed peculiar similarities. Certain phrases echoed those found in later Semitic writings. Parallel ideas about a flood that reshaped the earth, about a divine warning ignored, and about watchers who once guided mankind. The resemblance to early passages from Genesis and the apocryphal Book of Enoch could not be dismissed as coincidence. It was as if fragments of a single story had scattered across cultures, carried by generations who barely remembered its source. The recurring figure of the Watchers of the Sky intrigued scholars the most. In Mesopotamian legend, the Apkallu, sages sent by the gods, taught humanity wisdom before being cast away for their arrogance. In Hebrew tradition, the Watchers were angels who descended to earth and defied divine law. Now, within an Egyptian manuscript written millennia earlier, these same archetypes appeared once more, under new names, but bearing the same roles, those who gave knowledge and those who were punished for it. This convergence of myths from Egypt, Sumer, and early Israel revealed something extraordinary. The ancient world might have shared a common memory, retold through different tongues and beliefs. The Egyptian scribes, with their gift for record-keeping, may have been among the first to preserve this memory in writing. Their papyri did not simply record prayers for the afterlife. They chronicled visions of humanity's earliest teachers, struggles, and the moral lessons of a world that had already known destruction. For Egyptologists, this realization reframed how they saw their own civilization. The priests who wrote these books were not merely caretakers of the dead, they were historians of cosmic order, preserving stories about human origins, divine rebellion, and renewal. Through astronomical charts and mythic allegories, They sought to capture the rhythm of the universe itself, the same rhythm that governed the Nile, the stars, and the human soul. Each line, each symbol, seemed to reflect an understanding that life was part of something vast and cyclical. The Egyptians believed that creation and destruction were not opposites, but partners in eternity. Perhaps these books, far from being mystical curiosities, were attempts to preserve that truth, that humanity is bound to forces far greater than itself. As scholars continued to study the fragments, they began to suspect that the ancient Egyptians were not only chroniclers of their own beliefs, but custodians of something much older, a story that may have begun long before their temples rose from the desert sands. The voices of the sky they wrote about could have been mythic memories of the earliest contact between humankind and the mysteries of the cosmos. Whatever their true origin, these texts carried an unmistakable message. The search for meaning did not begin with us. It began with them. When the ancient Egyptian manuscripts were finally stabilized and brought into controlled laboratories, a new phase of discovery began, not through excavation, but through translation. Archaeologists, linguists, and theologians worked together, piecing together the faded lines of ink that had survived thousands of years. What they began to uncover was more than a series of religious passages. It was a philosophical map, a vision of existence that stretched from the heavens to the human soul. Among the recovered fragments, repeated references appeared to something called the two ways, a division between the path of light and the path of shadow. This phrase immediately drew the attention of Egyptologists familiar with the Book of Two Ways, the world's earliest known depiction of the afterlife. In that ancient funerary text, the soul must navigate two possible routes, one leading to eternal harmony, the other to darkness and dissolution. Yet the language in these newly found writings went far beyond funerary belief. It spoke of living choices, of moral and cosmic balance, of knowledge that could either preserve the world or destroy it. One passage described a cycle of fire, a recurring age when flood and flame cleanse the earth, leaving only fragments of memory behind. At first, scholars dismissed this as symbolic, a poetic way of describing renewal and decay. But the astronomical diagrams that accompanied the text told another story. Meticulous drawings of star alignments, eclipses, and celestial arcs revealed an astonishing precision. Some patterns matched modern calculations of planetary cycles, including the precession of Orion's belt, a constellation sacred to the Egyptians as the celestial resting place of Osiris, god of rebirth. As researchers compared these symbols with other ancient traditions, a striking connection emerged. Similar warnings about cosmic cycles appeared in Mesopotamian myths of the flood, in early Vedic hymns, and in the apocryphal Book of Enoch, where watchers warn humanity of destruction brought by fire and water. The Egyptian text seemed to preserve the same theme, that the heavens themselves recorded the moral history of humankind, and that imbalance on earth mirrored chaos among the stars. Decoding the hieroglyphs was a painstaking process. Many of the symbols were hybrids, early pictographs combined with foreign marks unknown to Egyptian writing. Linguists realized these may have been borrowed from a much older system of communication, one that predated both Sumerian cuneiform and classical hieroglyphs. This finding suggested that the Egyptian scribes were not inventing these stories, but inheriting them, carefully adapting fragments of an even earlier language into their own. What emerged was a profound message that transcended time. The manuscripts seemed to describe knowledge once widely known, later lost, then reinterpreted through myth and religion. The cycle of fire might not have referred solely to physical destruction, but to the repeating patterns of human behavior, pride, conflict, and renewal. Egypt's ancient priests may have encoded these lessons in their sacred texts, believing that wisdom itself was divine, yet dangerous in the wrong hands. The collaboration between disciplines turned what began as an archaeological curiosity into a living dialogue between civilizations. The parallels between Egyptian, Sumerian, and early Hebrew writings pointed toward a shared cultural memory, one that suggested humanity's oldest stories were not isolated inventions, but fragments of a universal understanding of time, nature, and moral order. As the final inscriptions were analyzed under multispectral imaging, faint traces of gold leaf appeared in the hieroglyphs representing the Eye of Ra, the sun's watchful gaze. This, researchers believed, was symbolic, a warning that the truth was always visible to those who looked beyond illusion. Hidden in these ancient hieroglyphs, across 5 millennia of silence, lay the echo of an old belief that the stars themselves remember even when humankind forgets. As translation of the Egyptian manuscripts deepened, the scholars who worked on them began to sense that they were approaching something far more profound than myth or ritual. What emerged from the fragmented lines of text was not a prayer to the gods, but a conversation with them. These passages describe dialogues between divine beings and mortals, exchanges filled with warning, regret, and reflection. The tone was philosophical, even mournful, as if the ancient authors had recorded not just stories, but confessions. In one translated section, a voice identified as the keeper of the sky gates warns of humankind's growing pride. The text speaks of an earlier age, a time when mortals walked beside the shining ones and were taught the secrets of the heavens, the movement of stars, the power of metals, the shaping of light. These gifts, however, became the cause of ruin. Humanity, it said, used divine knowledge to open the earth and wound the sky. The narrative echoes through several ancient traditions: the Mesopotamian tales of the Apkallu, the fallen sages, the Hebrew account of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch, and even the later Greek myths of Prometheus bringing forbidden fire to mankind. Egyptologists and theologians debated the meaning of these passages for years. Some believed they represented an early moral allegory, a warning about the dangers of curiosity and ambition. Others saw them as symbolic of humanity's growing self-awareness, the point when people first recognized their ability to shape and destroy their own world. The ancient Egyptian concept of Ma'at, or cosmic balance, seemed central to this theme. In these texts, the fall of divine messengers and the corruption of humankind are not isolated events, but signs that order has been replaced by chaos. When harmony between heaven and earth collapses, the world must cleanse itself to begin anew. As more fragments were pieced together, the manuscripts began to describe what the scribes called the second creation, an event following a great purification by fire and flood. It was said to be a time when humankind was made again, but without memory. To modern scholars, this phrase suggested a cyclical understanding of history, that civilization rises, reaches a peak of knowledge, then falls, only to rebuild again. It was a worldview strikingly similar to myths found in other ancient cultures, from the Hindu concept of cosmic ages to Plato's account of Atlantis' downfall. The warnings in these texts were not limited to moral lessons. They also contained curious observations about the sun and stars. Several passages referred to the turning of the sun's heart and the darkening of the sky's breath, which researchers linked to descriptions of solar disruptions or global catastrophes. When scientists compared these accounts with geological and astronomical data, they noted coincidences with known solar cycles and ancient climate shifts, periods marked by famine, floods, and social collapse. Whether coincidence or insight, The alignment was unsettling. For those studying the manuscripts, the deeper message seemed both simple and timeless. The Egyptians, like the civilizations that followed them, understood that knowledge carries weight, that progress without wisdom invites destruction. These ancient scribes were not only recording their faith, but expressing a profound understanding of human nature, our capacity for creation matched only by our potential for ruin. The more the team uncovered, the clearer the manuscript's tone became, not one of doom, but of remembrance. It urged future generations to guard balance, to respect the forces that sustain life, and to avoid repeating the mistakes of ages past. Beneath the poetic imagery of gods and divine messengers lay a very human truth, that civilizations, no matter how advanced, survive only as long as they honor the harmony between their power and their conscience. By the time the final fragments were translated, scholars realized they were reading more than ancient Egyptian theology. They were reading humanity's oldest mirror, a reflection of ourselves, written in ink and starlight 5,000 years ago. As the final lines of the ancient Egyptian manuscripts were pieced together, scholars realized that their discovery had reached beyond archaeology into something timeless and unsettling. The closing passages of the text contained what appeared to be a prophecy written in poetic but deliberate language. When the stars return to their first place, the earth will speak again. For years, the phrase was thought to be symbolic, perhaps a reference to renewal or resurrection. But as astronomers analyzed the star charts preserved alongside the writings, a remarkable detail emerged. The constellations described in the manuscripts were not random. They marked the slow procession of the heavens, a full celestial cycle spanning roughly 26,000 years. That cycle, according to modern calculations, is completing in our time. This realization brought a new dimension to the ancient words. The return of the stars was not mythic poetry. It was an observation of cosmic rhythm, the same precession of the equinoxes that modern science now tracks. To the Egyptians, this cycle may have symbolized the heartbeat of creation itself, the turning of the great wheel that governs all life. When that wheel completes, the texts warn, the earth will speak, not with words, but through change, floods, droughts, fire, and silence. At first glance, such imagery appears apocalyptic, yet as Egyptologists and philosophers revisited the context, they saw something deeper. The manuscripts did not predict destruction as punishment. They described renewal as necessity. In their worldview, imbalance between humankind and nature would always summon correction, the world's way of healing itself. The cycle of fire described in earlier passages, once thought to foretell catastrophe, began to read as a cosmic reminder that survival depends on balance, not dominance. Modern scholars drew striking parallels between these ancient reflections and the challenges of the present age. The texts spoke of the earth's voice dimmed by the smoke of men, of rivers that forget their paths, and of the sun that burns without rest. To those who studied them, the resemblance to modern environmental crises, climate disruption, deforestation, and ecological collapse felt more than coincidental. The ancient authors seem to have understood a principle that modern civilization often forgets, that the fate of humanity and the health of the earth are inseparable. The Egyptian scribes who wrote these books may not have intended to frighten. Instead, they sought to remind future generations of the delicate order that sustains all things. Their prophecies were less about divine wrath and more about cosmic law, the rhythm of cause and consequence that even gods could not escape. Across millennia, through crumbling papyrus and fading ink, their message endures, that knowledge without wisdom leads to ruin, and that every age must rediscover the humility to listen to the world it inhabits. As the translations concluded, one final line stood out, etched faintly on the last surviving fragment. "The wise will read the sky, for the earth remembers." To many, it felt like the voice of an ancient civilization reaching through time, not warning of the end, but calling for remembrance. Today, the so-called books of the two paths are studied not only as relics of Egypt's spiritual past, but as reflections of humanity's oldest insight that every civilization writes its own fate into the stars. The same constellations that guided the pharaohs still shine above us, marking the passage of time, bearing silent witness to our choices. Perhaps the terrifying truth hidden in these 5,000-year-old Egyptian books is not about what will happen to the world, but about what has already begun, a reminder that the story of creation is still being written, and that we are its authors.